Welcome to Test Crackers. We're on a mission to make studying for the GMAT and GRE not only not suck, but actually be awesome. We put tons of care and attention to detail into giving our students in our live in-person, live online, and private tutoring sessions the best possible experience that they can have. And we're excited now to bring some of that care and attention to detail to a more public format via YouTube videos. My name's Isaac. I've been teaching with Test Crackers for a few years now, but I've been helping people elevate their performance on standardized tests for over a decade, and I've been teaching professionally for over 20 years. I'm excited to be a part of your graduate school journey because I feel that our world can benefit from the most qualified professionals that we can find, and I love helping people elevate their quality of life, their enjoyment, and ideally the quality of life and enjoyment of the people they interact with on a daily basis as well. So let's teach you how to study for the GRE. First things first, there's a good amount of material that's tested on the GRE, and you're either going to have to learn it for the first time or relearn many of the things that you at one time knew. I'm talking about things like formulas for geometry. I'm talking about things like exponent rules. I'm talking about things like how to divide by a fraction. Now, before you get turned off, I'm going to recommend some resources that are going to help you accelerate this process greatly. But for now, the most important thing that you can do is set aside about 30 minutes to an hour and just do a little bit of online research on the different question formats in each section. There's going to be a few different formats that you probably haven't seen before on other standardized tests on the math section. And there's going to be some question formats that might be familiar, some that might be unfamiliar on the verbal section as well. And you just want to know how to approach, at least at a very basic level, those formats so that you can, as quickly as possible, take a diagnostic practice exam. And I'll recommend some sources for those in a moment. Why do you want to take a practice exam so soon, especially if you know it's probably not going to go that well? Well, my guess is you want your study to be as efficient as possible, and you don't want to sink any more time and energy into this than you absolutely have to get the absolutely best score that you possibly can. The key to that is knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are as early as possible. That's the purpose of that diagnostic test. It's not to get a great score. It's just to figure out what's going well for you and what's not going well for you with basically zero to minimal preparation. That's going to help you optimize your study hours. It's going to help you optimize your plan, and it's going to help you avoid spending time on things that aren't important for you, which can be a huge drag on your motivation and, of course, your time and energy. Your budget and your learning style are going to be the things that guide which is the best way to learn and relearn this core content. So let's just go through all the options that are available to you. At the top of the list and the lowest in the cost sphere would be free. I think the main thing that you want to be thinking about if you're considering going the free preparation route is it's probably just going to take much, much longer than it otherwise would if you had a structured course of study that's written by professionals and or access to a professional. Having said that, I do see people prepare for free for the GRE all the time. Some of them get fantastic scores. Some of them have frustrating journeys, but eventually reach their goal score. And you can totally do that if you're committed to it. Getting into the honesty with yourself, the learning style part of this, the most important thing you can do is have an honest conversation with yourself and just really be honest. Are you the type of person who's going to sit down and collect all those free resources, organize your time the right way, and stay accountable for a long enough period of time to reach your goal score on the exam? If you are, fantastic. That's a good option for you. If you're already cringing or you're already sort of rolling your eyes at yourself, literally or figuratively, then you definitely want to think about the options that are there to help you structure your studies a little bit more, in a more focused way. Let's put it that way. So at the lowest end of that cost sphere of helping you structure your studies is going to be printed materials or books. And there's a wide array of good books out there on the market. I would strongly recommend getting a third-party provider's books in addition to the official materials books. Some people I meet only buy the official guide for GRE Quant or the official guide for GRE Verbal or the official guide that kind of combines both of those things. And for most students, that's probably not going to be enough to accelerate their timeline very much. It's definitely way better than nothing, and it's vastly superior to only using free problems on the internet. But it's not going to give you the depth and sort of strategic instruction that will give you a major advantage in most cases. If you're not sure which third-party providers are best, just reach out to us at our social media channels below. We're hopeful that this video is going to stay relevant for quite some time. So I don't want to tell you to go with a certain company and then all of a sudden, they change their materials and now they suck. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, you told me to do this and now it's garbage. So just reach out to us if you're not sure what to do. But If you do a little bit of online research, you find some message boards, you find some rating systems. Most of those are relatively trustworthy, and I think you can trust the recommendations of people on those online sites. Next up in the cost sphere, and most likely the efficacy and speed sphere, and we'll talk about how long this is probably going to take you in a moment, it would be a digital self-paced class. That's best for people who are good independent learners and they don't necessarily need the structure and support of other human beings around them, like a live instructor to interact with or other folks in the class to help them stay accountable, but who either don't necessarily absorb information particularly well just from reading books, or just have a difficult time structuring their study without some kind of external structure helping them stay on track and plan out how much they're going to study and when they're going to study and what they're going to study next. There are, again, just great options out there across the board. You can reach out to us for recommendations, or you can poke around online and see what are the top rated classes du jour. Next up in the cost sphere, and again, the efficacy and speed sphere are going to be live classes. These can range from slightly more expensive than a digital self-paced class to significantly more expensive, 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much. But you do get a lot of value for live classes. You get an instructor who will answer your questions in real time, who's dedicated to your success, ideally, if you make a good choice, and we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. And also someone who's probably going to be willing to give you at least some one-on-one attention outside of a regular class environment. In addition to that, there's extra accountability, I think, when you have a real relationship with someone, not just a digital relationship. Not that digital relationships aren't real, but a relationship with a person on a video is going to be a little bit different level of accountability than a relationship in person for most people. And if accountability is something that is a soft spot for you, then the live class route is almost certainly the way to go, unless you have a slightly bigger budget, in which case private tutoring can also be great. More on that in a moment. As far as what live classes to take, perhaps obviously I recommend checking out Test Crackers. You can find our website and our class offerings and any current promotions we're offering in the description of this video. However, we realize that we may not be the best fit for every single person out there, and we totally respect that. I think when you're making these decisions, what you want to do is just make sure that you're picking a provider you resonate with. You're probably going to learn more, you're going to learn faster, and you're going to be more motivated if you at least like the people you're working with somewhat, or at the very least, you feel that they are effective educators in delivering the information that you need and keeping you on track the way that you want to. Again, if you want other recommendations for live classes and you're not interested in Test Crackers classes, or you have questions, you can feel free to give us a call or shoot us a direct message on any of our platforms listed below. The most important thing to mention at this point, I think, and this really goes across the board for any of these resources, is read reviews. You want to pick classes that have actual verified testimonials from people, ideally on a third-party source like Yelp or Trustpilot, something like that, where it's difficult to forge reviews. You want to pick providers who have a track record of success, who can demonstrate a high likelihood of delivering results for the money that you're giving them, excuse me, a little presumptuous, the money that you're giving them, and also that they're going to follow through with you on the customer service side. So make sure you check out that in the reviews as well. Some providers out there are great on the content front, but if you have a support issue, it's kind of a nightmare. And everyone has different degrees of what they're willing to put up with that. So again, just honesty with yourself is the most important thing here as you embark on this journey. Next up in the cost sphere would be boot camps, but I've put those on the same level in terms of efficacy as live classes, because that tends to be what they are. If you're looking at a digital self-paced boot camp, I mean, all digital self-paced classes in that respect could be boot camps if you go through them that quickly. So really I'm talking about live boot camps, which tend to be kind of pricey. Here's the thing about boot camps. They'll teach you the material faster, but the real question you have to answer is, are you going to learn the material faster? If you need to take the GRE in 4 weeks and you can't afford a private tutor, or you don't have access to a great private tutor close by, and you're looking at the boot camp thing, you need to be honest with yourself. Can you put the requisite number of hours in to learn all that material in that short of a time span? Because if you can't, you're probably wasting that extra money, and you should just take a live class, maybe consider extending your test date and or your application date to a different round of admissions. Now, I'm not going to say boot camps have no value. It's just that they're really only valuable for a small percentage of test takers, in my experience. And those are people who either are not working or just for some reason have very flexible work hours and can study a ton, in addition to spending lots of classroom hours in the classroom on consecutive days. That's how most boot camps work. They'll try to take a 9 or 12-week class and condense it into 1 to 2 weeks. And they're probably doing the same number of hours of instruction, and you'll probably have the same number of hours of homework. So you really want to take a hardcore look at, am I committed? Am I going to be able to make the sacrifices that it's going to take to put in these types of hours? And am I the type of person who I think can absorb that amount of information and do that number of reps in terms of applying the information and practicing it in a very short and stressful period of time? If not, avoid the boot camp thing. That's my advice. If you're all in and boot camp's your best option, then absolutely go for it. And just make sure that you are committed. At the top of the cost sphere generally, and usually the efficacy sphere, is private tutoring. If you are more time constrained and less monetarily constrained, private tutoring is almost certainly going to be the best route for you, because there's just no substitute for having a qualified top professional tailor a study program just for you, or just for the areas that you need help on. Perhaps obviously that is more expensive, because if you're hiring someone who's really, really great, they probably command a relatively high price in the marketplace. Again, you're looking for reviews, you're looking for track record, you're looking for testimonials. Most tutors are going to be happy to spend at least a little bit of time on the phone or direct messaging with you to just so you can get a feel for their style and whether you resonate with them. And what I recommend usually when people are considering tutoring, especially if it's very expensive on an hourly basis, which a lot of private tutoring is see if you can get an hour session in with someone, or just an initial consultation type session, and then later on commit to a full package of hours. Because usually if you buy 10 or 15 or 20 hours from people, they'll give you a price break, which is usually worth a good amount of money. And really the only time to just like commit fully to a tutor is if you have like a strong recommendation from a friend or colleague. But even then, I think I would always recommend doing a trial session just to see if it's a good fit on both sides, because it's can definitely be a difficult struggle if you feel like you're just not resonating with your tutor and you're paying through the nose, and that can get very, very stressful. If you have any other questions on that stuff, just feel free to reach out anytime. Next thing that you want to be thinking about is practice problem sources. And there's a wide variety of these. The highest quality ones are going to be the official guides. So you're definitely going to want to pick up copies of all three of those books. It's more than worth the price gauged against the cost of what you'll likely pay for your graduate school. It's absolutely nothing, essentially. So just invest in those at the very, very minimum, even if you plan to use free resources for your kind of strategic studying. Why use the official guide resources? Well, there are good third-party question writers out there, but they're always just a proxy for the real thing. And for some reason, nobody has really come along and totally blown me away with their ability to completely emulate the real feel of GRE practice questions, particularly on the verbal side. So you just want to be careful with that. The problem with the official guides is there aren't a ton of practice problems in them, unfortunately. And so you're also going to want to consider getting some third-party practice questions. Again, the sort of landscape is ever changing. If you want recommendations on the best materials, feel free to reach out to us through any of the channels below. Otherwise, just do some research, like I said before, and make sure that you have a third-party provider of questions, because you're probably going to want lots and lots of practice questions for learning to implement this core content that you're going to be learning. It's not enough to just know the content for most people. You also need to have practice and experience applying it so that when you get into the test and you're under time pressure, you can execute and perform and get credit for the knowledge that you've built. You're also going to want to get your hands on simulation practice exams for exactly the same reason I just mentioned, but on a larger level, which is really sitting there for 4 hours and getting comfortable with taking the GRE, that full experience. Sports analogies are great here. If you're teaching me how to play soccer, you might first teach me a couple, basic techniques around how to kick the ball, where I want my foot to land, how to aim, things like that. And then from there, you might graduate to things like more dynamic moves, scoring, defense, that kind of stuff. And then gradually, you would probably help me build up to playing in a real game. Now, there might be differences there. I've never coached anyone to play soccer, but I think that's a good analogy and a good mental framework if you've been through that process before, really learning any skill. That's a good way to think about the GRE. And you're going to want time to put this all together, put all the micro skills that you're learning together before you actually take the test. So that test day kind of just feels like another day at the office. That's the familiarity that we want with the exam by the time we go to take the official test. So what do you want in terms of practice exams? There are several official practice exams available. As of today, you can get 2 for free, and then there are 3 more available for purchase. So that's 5, which is not a ton. So you're also going to want to invest in some third-party exams. As I've said many times, reach out to us if you need recommendations on that, or do a quick web search to find the best option for you. How should you structure those practice exams? For most people, if you are not going to have a structured study plan of your own, then take your initial diagnostic practice test, figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are based on that, and then go through as much core content as you can, focusing on those strengths and weaknesses. And then once you feel you've built up those weaknesses to a reasonable degree, now it's time for another practice test, reassess, focus on weakness areas, another practice test, reassess, focus on weakness areas, etc. Part of the reason I recommend engaging with a professional provider is they can structure your study in just a much more specific way. That's kind of going to go just well beyond the scope of this video, but if many of you are really, really needing a study plan, then let me know in the comments of this video, and we'll see what we can do to produce one of those for you that's general enough, but also robust enough that you can actually get value out of it. You'll probably want to use the third-party exams a little earlier in your prep. I would recommend taking an official practice test for your very first diagnostic, because nothing really has the real feel of those official diagnostics. That's a real score, a real algorithm, real old retired GRE questions. That's going to be the most accurate read on your current skills, and again, that'll help you optimize your studies. Once you have that one under your belt, you're going to switch to the third-party exams, which usually have pretty good analysis features, breakdowns of what content areas you're struggling with the most, what content areas are taking you the longest time, that kind of stuff. You're going to want to know that as you're going through the middle portion of your study. And then as you get later in your study and you're more just looking to simulate the real feel of the exam and get the most accurate score check you can get, then you will switch back to the official practice test for your last 2 to 5 practice tests before your official exam. And those you'll probably want to do in closer succession, probably about a week apart leading up to your real test, unless you're super time constrained or you're not working. Otherwise, I would say practice exam interval is probably between 1 and 4 weeks during your content building phase, because it takes a long time to really master weakness areas if you're struggling with them. Now, that's just a general recommendation. There's tons of flexibility in there. So once again, reach out to us if you're really not sure how to handle that. Let's talk about some tips as you're going through these materials, executing on your study plan, whatever you decide is going to be right for you. First thing is get in the habit of doing your scratch work. In the math section, in the verbal section, you're going to be taking notes on different problems, but the test itself is going to be on a computer screen, and you're not going to be able to write on that computer screen, at least not as of today's technology. So you're going to be doing all your figuring on a separate sheet of paper, and you want to get used to that as quickly as possible. Other reasons for this are it's easy to fall in the habit of marking up reading passages as you're reading them, which is extremely helpful for most of us. You're not going to be able to do that on the screen on test day. Things like drawing geometry figures, it's easy to get lazy with that and just use the figures that are in front of you in the book. Don't get in that habit. Just get in the good habit of doing your work on a separate sheet of paper from the beginning, and you'll thank me later for that one. Even though it's a simple tip, it's a very powerful one. In terms of timing your practice questions, I would recommend starting completely untimed, not with your first practice test. Your first practice test must be strictly timed, and it has to be a real simulation of what your score would be like if you took the GRE today. That's a very important data point. But after you get out of that and you're just going into the skill building phase at the beginning, you want to go as slow as you need to develop good habits and integrate the processes that you're going to be learning about in your classes and or with your tutor. Once you feel that you have made those processes automatic, then you can start introducing a tiny bit of time awareness by just using a count up timer on your practice questions. And I don't recommend doing sets of practice questions early in your prep. You can save that for later. I recommend just doing one problem at a time, because if you're doing something wrong or you're misunderstanding something on a problem, you want to fix that before you do 30 other problems on that same content area and are just, ingraining that bad way of thinking about them, or that mistaken way of thinking about them. Okay, so early on in your prep, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I know that might seem kind of paradoxical, but that's really the key to the game with this stuff. As you get more comfortable with those processes and you start to develop more time awareness, if you're really struggling with time, you can take your average time for a week's study and then try to beat that the next week, or you can just go straight into using a countdown timer. And I usually recommend somewhere in the 3-minute range to start, and then you can gradually work that down. But certain types of verbal questions, like logic questions, those can take up to 3 minutes, and sometimes that can be warranted to spend that time. If you're faster on other question types, you can't afford to spend 3 minutes on every single question on the GRE, or you won't be able to attempt all the questions. But there are times and places for that strategy as well, because just FYI, there's no guessing penalty for the GRE. So you always want to answer every single question on every single section, because it costs you nothing to just bubble that answer, even if you were going to leave it blank. And at least it gives you the upside that you might get the question right. A very important recommendation that I think a lot of people fall down on is making sure that they're keeping a list of questions to go back and redo on a regular basis, and then spending the first 15 minutes at least of every single study session that you do, and I mean every single study session, going back and redoing those problems. Now, the way you want to do this is you want to track several things for questions you want to redo. The best types of questions to redo are questions that are hard or tricky for you, questions that have strategies or approaches or ways of thinking that aren't natural for you and that you want to become natural, or just things that you're seeing pop up a lot as you're going through your studies and you think, this is important, I need to remember this. What you're doing with this is you're sort of building like a flashcard deck of actual practice questions. Where the front of the flashcard is kind of like the question text itself, which will help you with your pattern recognition on the actual exam. And the back of the flashcard is the strategy, the thought pattern, the approach that you want to associate with that type of question. Because when you take the real GRE, it's all going to be the same core material, just reorganized in slightly different ways than you've seen it previously. And so you want to get good at recognizing things that you've seen before on previous questions on future questions. And what will happen is at the beginning, it might just be fragments of questions you've seen before. So you can kind of get like a piece of a question a little bit faster, and then you have to improvise to finish the entire question. As you get more practice questions under your belt and you develop your skills a little bit more, you might see questions that are almost exactly the same, just with different numbers. And we pay for that recognition with a reasonable amount of prep hours, but it's a great, great feeling. It's really good for your confidence in the middle of the test. And it's also amazing for your speed and your score when you can just see a question, immediately associate it with a question you've seen before and knock it out. If you're aiming for a super, super top score, let's say in like the 160s, like 165, and you're going for really, really competitive schools, then you probably want to be recognizing things in problems at least 50% of the time on the GRE, more like 70% for most people. And that goes for vocabulary words, not necessarily reading passages, but patterns of answer choices, right and wrong. And if you take one of our classes, we go super, super deep on how you can recognize that stuff and get great at that as fast as possible. But that's a little bit beyond the scope of this video, unfortunately. Let's talk about your schedule. This is really important when you're studying because you're probably going to be studying for a while for the GRE. Most people aren't going to be able to knock this out in like a couple of weeks or a couple of days. Some of you might be able to, and definitely consider yourselves lucky if you're in that boat. Most people are going to be studying somewhere between 3 and 6 months in my experience. Hate to be the bringer of bad news, but that's just how it usually goes because it's very difficult for most people who are non-experts to estimate how long it's going to take them to do this. It's often very difficult for experts to anticipate how long it's going to take people to do this because most people are working adults when they're applying to graduate school. Plenty of you are still in school, but either way, you have other commitments in your life, most likely. And you're probably not solely dedicated to the GRE. So sometimes things come up that are unexpected. You might lose a week or a month of studying, and that's just how it goes. So let's talk about how to sort of weather the storm, as it were. The most important thing you can do with your studies is make it a part of your daily routine. If you've done something every day for 3 days in a row, it's probably easier for your brain and body to continue to do it than it is to stop doing it. Those first few days can definitely be painful, but just like physical exercise, you want to get into a good habit. And so it requires zero willpower to execute on it. If you are studying the same time and the same place every day after work, you just go to a little office in your building, or you go to a cafe on the way home, or you wake up early and you study a little bit in your kitchen and then you head off to the gym. If you're making it a part of your daily routine, it'll be much easier to continue to have it be a part of your daily routine. The way I like to think about it is if I studied today, it's way easier to study tomorrow. If I didn't study today, it's way easier to not study tomorrow. Okay, so let's give you some advice for this. Very important that you get into a good routine with vocabulary if you do need to increase your vocabulary, if that's not already a strength for you or you're not already performing at the level that you want to, because vocabulary is about 50% of your score on the verbal section. Consistency is the king. Consistency is the king when it comes to building strength, when it comes to building endurance, and when it comes to building your skills with standardized tests. What you want to do is you want to set realistic goals for the amount of time that you can spend and then stick to those as best as you possibly can. I think most people are going to benefit from at least 4 to 6 hours of study for the GRE on a weekly basis. If you don't feel you can get that much in, you can definitely still reach your goal. It's probably just going to take you a lot longer. If you can study more than that, you're going to reach your goal faster in most cases. How long is it going to take? You know, it's impossible for me to tell you that, but a good general recommendation is it's probably going to take between 20 and 50 hours of study for each 1 point gain you want to make on your individual quant score or your individual verbal score. Now, if you take a really great class, you might be able to cut that down and get into the 10-hour per 1 point gain. And I like to think that our classes are 100% on that level, but that's for you to judge. And once again, I completely respect that. And I'm not saying nobody else can give you that type of experience. I'm just saying that I know for me personally and my colleagues at Test Crackers, we put a lot of emphasis on keeping our students as efficient as possible and giving them the support that they need to get to their goal as quickly as possible. But we know we're not the cheapest option. And for some of you, money is the bigger constraint and you have more time on your hands. And I'm happy that there's great options for you as well. So just plan for 20 to 50 hours for each 1 point gain you want to make on your score. Hopefully you're on the lower side of that. Hopefully you're working with someone who can help you get into that 10-hour per 1 point gain. And hopefully you're just crazy talented at this and you're in the like 1 hour per 1 point gain or 5 hour per 1 point gain. But just be realistic. Most of us, less than 1% of all humanity is going to be in that. You're probably going to be grinding on this for a large number of hours if you're like most people, particularly if standardized tests are not your strength. Now, the good news is you can definitely do it. You can definitely make this happen, but it's probably going to be an emotional roller coaster, and you want to expect that. You don't want to go into this process thinking everything's going to go smoothly and perfectly. That, I think, is a mistake. Like I said, a lot of stuff can happen in adult life. Some things you might think are going to go really fast. They end up being a total pain in the neck for you. Some things you might think are going to go really slow. They end up going faster. So you have that in addition to just being a human being. And some days you're feeling great. Some days you're feeling terrible. And you need to just ride that wave because it's consistency over time that's going to build skills in virtually any arena. It's like you want to be a better tennis player, you got to keep showing up and playing tennis and diagnosing your strengths and weaknesses, getting coaching, focusing on your weaknesses, practicing those, drilling those, and taking time to play real matches as well to polish your mental game. So this is exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing as any skill you've built up until this point in your life. So you want to expect that some days are going to be amazing. You're going to feel on top of the world. Nothing can stop you. Some days it's going to feel like nothing's working and you just show up and you put in your hour or your 90 minutes that you've committed to, and then you just forget about it and you show up the next day and you keep going, okay? The more you think about studying, probably the less studying you're actually going to do. So I would recommend just taking your mind off it as much as possible. So on that front, let's talk about motivation. Now, here's the thing about motivation. You don't need motivation to get a great GRE score. You just need to show up and do the work. So I recommend focusing on commitment more than motivation. However, let's be honest, being motivated really helps for most of us. A couple things you can do. First is make sure you write down your goal or make a vision board on your phone of pictures of things that remind you of why you're studying for the GRE. What's the ultimate goal that you're reaching for out of this? Is it a certain career path? Is it a certain salary? Is it a certain lifestyle? Is it a certain work-life balance? Is it a certain impact on the world or the people around you or your family? All of that stuff that's important to you, you want to write down because you're probably going to need more than one great reason to sustain at the level that you're going to want to make this happen for yourself. Because like I said, you don't want to expect it to be perfectly smooth sailing. If it is, that's fantastic. You're very lucky, but you're probably going to have 2 to 3 major challenges or major setbacks, major setbacks with this. And you want something to remind you of why you're sacrificing in the moment, because you're probably going to have to say no to some things that you would really like to say yes to in order to make time to study for the GRE. Most adults I know, they don't just have a bunch of time to study for the GRE. They have to actively make that, taking away from other things that they might like to do. Now, of course, you want to stay balanced, more on that in a second, but having a clear goal in mind and looking at that every single time you study is going to help tremendously to fuel your fire. And you know what? Honestly, it's probably not going to help every single time you look at it. Some days you're just going to have to drag yourself into the practice room and do your work, even though you're not feeling motivated at all, and no amounts or number of vision boards or clever witticisms are going to change anything for you. You got to just get it done, okay? And I strongly encourage that as much as possible. But if you're doing that every day, it's going to be really tough on you. So at least have some days where you're just like, man, I'm really excited that I'm putting in this time, investing in this vision. That's really important to me. Next best thing you can do is have honest conversations with your friends after you decide what your study trajectory and schedule is likely to be like and how long you think it's probably going to take. And you know, if you're in that 200 hours to get your goal range, then you have to break it down. If you can study 10 hours a week, then 20 weeks, you're probably going to be there, or at least have a realistic shot. Some of you, it's going to take more. Some of you, it's going to take less. But you want to talk to important people in your life and just be honest with them about how available you're going to be during your GRE studies, when you're going to be available, what you can commit to and what you can't commit to, and try to negotiate a fair agreement with these people. Of course, if you're asking for something from them, it's usually good to give something in return. Most relationships are based on reciprocity. You want to not corrupt all your relationships as just to study for the GRE. But things like partners at work, people on your team, maybe people you live with, and of course, romantic partners, all of these people are relying on us a lot of times to a great degree. And so we need to prioritize and balance accordingly. What I recommend usually is just pause the video right now and make a note on your phone or make a note somewhere that you'll see it regularly of what are your biggest priorities in life, like top 5, top 10, and just list those out. You know, it might be health, family, work, and then, you know, GREs after that. Or fun is more important to you than studying for the GRE. Well, if something fun comes up, then you're going to prioritize that. But for most of us, some amounts of fun, some fun things like being there for your best friend's wedding is going to be more important than the GRE. But certain friendships, certain relationships, certain fun activities, they're going to be less important. And if you decide on that and get clear on that now, it's going to be a lot easier to make those tough decisions down the line when you're like, man, I really want to go out and enjoy this bottle of wine with this new friend I just made, but it's just lower on the priority list than the GRE. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to study right now and then reschedule with that person for my free day or whatever it is. I'm not saying you can't do these things, I'm just saying you want to be strategic and intelligent from the beginning about how you set up your schedule and timing so you can minimize the drama. The more drama there is in your preparation because of your relationships or lack of ability to manage those things or lack of preparation, the harder it's going to be to reach your goal. And the more likely it is that you're straight up just not going to reach it. And that is the sad truth of many goals, many goals. That's the sad truth. You know, I heard some statistics recently. I wasn't planning to talk about this, but it's just hitting me on a deep level right now. I think it was something like 2% of people end up achieving their biggest goals. And I was like, wow, that is just absolutely overwhelmingly way lower than I would anticipate. And I think just achieving big goals, it's just tough for people to stay consistent. There's so many distractions. I think our minds are really wired evolutionarily to just focus on whatever's right in front of us and not necessarily to think about, you know, our 5-year plan or our 10-year plan or our 30-year plan to end world hunger or ace the GRE, as it were, or both. So, you know, I don't want to get too off topic here, but it's something to think about. You know, achieving a long-term goal, it takes a lot. It takes a lot. So just set yourself up for success. I want you to win. I want you to be in that 2%. I personally want to be in that 2%. And let's just do everything we possibly can to set ourselves up for success and minimize the drag so that we're not failing to prepare and therefore preparing to fail. So with that in mind, to avoid burnout, you definitely, in my opinion, want to, and you know, if you're taking another class and they're making these recommendations for you, you can probably trust your instructor if they're a qualified professional for sure. You don't have to always take all of my advice, but my personal advice after having done this for a very long time is pick one weeknight and one weekend night that you can just forget about the GRE completely. Don't study for the entire day. Sorry, not the entire day. On the weekend, you're probably going to want to leverage some of your free time if you're working. But in the evening, you can pick one weekend night to go out and enjoy and be a regular human being. You know, take a load off, do the stuff that you like to do. If you like to stay in and just relax, you know, do that. If you like to connect with friends, get out, socialize, do that as well. The longer you can sustain your studies, the better score you're going to get. And the more consistent you can stay, the faster you're going to get that result. And taking strategic breaks is a huge part of the learning process. Just like you don't want to overtrain when you're working your body, you don't want to overtrain when you're working your mind. Now, you also don't want to undertrain, so find that balance for yourself and be honest with yourself about what's too much and what's too little. What I usually tell my students in my tutoring sessions and in-person classes is you want to get really good at handling emotional pain when you're studying for the GRE, okay? If you're like, I don't want to do this right now and I'm doing it anyway, that's a good thing. You want to get very good at recognizing physical pain and stopping immediately. If you're sick, if you're exhausted, if you're just straight up not making progress, you're harming yourself, that is completely counterproductive. There's no way that you're going to be increasing your GRE score. It's just a waste of time. Sometimes you need to just rest, take a step back, and then readjust. You know, we all have to confront the realities of being human, and the realities are that many of us have some limitations. There is some breaking point past which we are just not being efficient any longer. I think I'm just going to pause there. There's so much more I can talk to you about studying for the GRE. I would love to work with you. My colleagues at Test Crackers would love to work with you. Please check out our courses and consider working with us if you feel that it's a good fit. And if not, it's all good, like I've mentioned a couple times in the video. For now, the best advice that I can give you is just stay positive and stay consistent. Believe that you can achieve your goal. I know that you can achieve your goal, and I believe in you. It may just take a lot longer and a lot more trials and tribulations than you think it will, but hopefully not. If you make good decisions up front and you follow the advice I've given you, you'll be avoiding 90% of the major pitfalls that most students succumb to. And that will give you a major advantage. And hopefully, just like I said at the beginning, help us fulfill on our mission of making this whole process not only not suck, but actually be awesome. And just think about the GRE as a great step in a direction that's really important to you, because if it wasn't important to you, you probably wouldn't be putting up with this stuff and studying for the exam. And don't worry about all the facts and formulas you're going to memorize, or am I ever going to use this vocab word again? Think about it as practicing your grit, practicing your dedication to whatever cause is important to you, and building that skill set of achieving your goals. If there's anything I can do to support, don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, I will look forward to seeing you all in our next video series. We're probably going to be doing videos on things like certain question formats, so definitely check out the hyperlinks in the description of this video and browse our channel to find more valuable GRE resources and reach out to us anytime. Good luck, even though if you have the right strategy, you won't need it. Talk to you soon.